Hello, my fellow warriors. Welcome to the Warrior Insights channel, where today's topic of discussion is exploring weather manipulation strategies. This will be part one in a multi-part series that I'm going to do about the climate change agenda. Before I begin, I'd like to remind you that the corresponding Substack article to this video may be found at athenaangelique.substack.com. I believe it's important to talk about this subject, especially given all the recent climate events that we've been seeing, to include record-breaking temperatures, wildfires, and the Maui disaster. We should know what our government and the military, or a multitude of governments and militaries, have the capability to do. We should be aware of it. I'm not saying that they are the cause of these events, but you should be aware of the capabilities that are out there and the technology that is out there and how you could prepare yourself for what's to come. Before we talk about that, we must talk about what is weather in the first place before we could talk about how it's manipulated. Weather refers to the atmospheric conditions in a specific location at a given time. It is influenced by a variety of factors, including the Earth's rotation, the sun's energy, air masses, ocean currents, and more. If you can manipulate energy, you can manipulate the weather. One example was back in 1952 with the Lynmouth flood disaster. We only found out the truth about this disaster almost 50 years later. What happened in Lynmouth? Well, on Friday, August 15th in 1952, the tiny village of Lynmouth suffered what could be described as the worst river flood in English history. On the day itself, just over 9 inches of rain fell, 6 inches of which fell in a few short hours in the afternoon, early evening. Add in the 6 inches of rain that had already fallen the first 2 weeks of August, it is no surprise the top of Exmoor was unable to absorb the rainfall and was totally overwhelmed. It was estimated that 90 million tons of rain fell in North Devon and West Somerset on that day. Nearly 50 years later, a BBC investigation revealed that an RAF rainmaking experiment over southern England came days before. Secret experiments were causing heavy rainfall. Survivors tell how the air smelled of sulfur on the afternoon of the floods. They showed, the BBC, that RAF logbooks and personal testimony found Operation Cumulus. A glider pilot tells how he flew over Bedfordshire as a part of Operation Cumulus, spraying quantities of salt into the air. Scientists told him it had caused heavy downpour and stains 50 miles away in Middlesex. I was told the rain had been the heaviest for several years and all out of a sky which looked summery. The seaman said he'd made it rain, and he did. So the ability to manipulate the weather has been around for decades. So much so that countries had to make treaties against weather manipulation as early as 1978. Discussions between the U.S. and what was known as the USSR began as early as 1972 and 1974. The U.S. decision of 1972 to renounce the use of climate modification techniques for hostile purposes, and they brought in the USSR into it, and they signed a treaty against it in October of 1978. And these treaties have been modified and re-signed in 2010, which bans weather warfare or the use of weather modification techniques for the purposes of inducing damage or destruction. But how often do you know that countries sign treaties and don't adhere to it? I mean, what is preventing natural disasters from happening? And how can you prove what caused it? In 1969, there was a Rockefeller insider who gave a speech. His name was Dr. Richard Day, and these notes were recorded by Dr. Lawrence Dunnigan, who attended the seminar on that day. Now, Dr. Richard Day was a Rockefeller insider, and he had many amazing insights that he revealed that day in 1969, many of which had come true. Dr. Lawrence Dunnigan wrote the transcript and published it in 1988. And even in 1988, he had already described a multitude of things that Dr. Richard Day explained on that day in 1969 that had come true already by then. And I've included a link to this testimony in my Substack for you to read yourself. But I'm going to talk about what Dr. Richard Day said on that day in 1969 regarding specifically weather modification. I'm not merely referring to dropping iodide crystals into the clouds to precipitate rain. That's already there. But real control. Weather was seen as a weapon of war, a weapon of influencing public policy. It could make rain or withhold rain in order to influence certain areas, geographical regions, and bring them under your control. There were two sides to this that were rather striking. He said on the one hand, you could make drought during the growing season so that nothing will grow, and on the other hand, you could make for very heavy rains during harvest season so the fields are too muddy to bring in the harvest, and indeed, one might be able to do both. There was no statement on how this would be done. It was stated that either it was already possible or very, very close to being possible. Again, this was in 1969. Can man control the weather? Well, this man, Nikola Tesla, proved that it was possible. He made discoveries and inventions of great value to the development of radio transmission and the field of electricity. Tesla also wrote of a method whereby weather could be controlled so that deserts could become farmlands and where cold could be modified and heat tempered. He manipulated waves to change the course of giant wind patterns like the jet stream that shapes our weather. Tesla proved that it is possible to create gigantic standing electromagnetic waves, sometimes thousands of miles long, which can be used to modify the weather and create man-made droughts, floods, and storms. Tesla's giant standing electromagnetic waves can also create long-lasting, high-pressure areas. I've included in my Substack several examples of what happened with weather modification, such as producing frequencies of 40 million watts, temperature in Greensburg, Kansas, jumping 20 degrees in 10 minutes in 1987, appears to have been directly targeted by Soviet scalar weapons operating in a special produce energy mode. This was described by Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Bearden's article, and there are other examples I've included in my Substack regarding weather manipulation that has occurred in the 1980s, such as massive lightning generated and earthquake control. In 1987, Dr. Eastland, he talks about changing the weather by redirecting very high wind patterns or the jet stream. The scalar waves can be directed to specific areas, to specific depths, to cause earthquakes by disrupting the tectonic plates. So they figured this out. And there's Dr. Eastland invented the High Frequency Active Oral Research Program. They say it's no longer in use, but again, we don't know that. And I've included a video by Dr. Eastland explaining his technology in my Substack for you to view. And then let's talk about what is the jet stream and how does it affect weather. I included some key points about the jet stream to include speed and altitude, direction and meandering, and influence on weather, as the jet stream plays a significant role in shaping weather patterns. Seasonal variability changes weather patterns, and basically the jet stream influences weather patterns by steering weather systems. So if you could change the jet stream or influence the jet stream, you can control the weather and what it does. I've included a picture of an airplane here that is carrying silver iodide tubes used for cloud seeding. In 1996, there was a paper that came out by the Defense Technical Information Center called Weather as a Force Multiplier Owning the Weather in 2025. And I believe it's important for me to read to you the abstract of this paper. Again, this was in 1996, and this was written by the Air War College at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. In 2025, U.S. airspace forces can own the weather by capitalizing on emerging technologies and focusing development of those technologies to warfighting applications. Such a capability offers the warfighter tools to shape the battlespace in ways never before possible. It provides opportunities to impact operations across the full spectrum of conflict, and it is pertinent to all possible futures. The purpose of this paper is to outline a strategy for the use of a future weather modification system to achieve military objectives rather than to provide a detailed technical roadmap. A high-risk, high-reward endeavor, weather modification offers a dilemma not unlike the splitting of the atom. While some segments of society will always be reluctant to examine controversial issues such as weather modification, the tremendous military capabilities that could result from this field are ignored at our own peril. From enhancing friendly operations or disrupting those of the enemy via small-scale tailoring of natural weather patterns to complete dominance of global communications and counter-space control, weather modification offers the warfighter a wide range of possible options to defeat or coerce an adversary. Some of the potential capabilities of weather modification systems could provide warfighting commander-in-chief are listed in Table 1. It's important. Another important point in the paper makes is here. One major advantage of using simulated weather to achieve a desired effect is, unlike other approaches, it makes what are otherwise the results of deliberate actions appear to be consequences of natural weather phenomena. In addition, it is potentially relatively inexpensive to do. Cover up your traces, do it on the cheap. You got a great warfighting tool, don't you? I included a pictograph from 1995 pictograph from that paper that explains how they could do this. And then I talked about what happened in World War II. They created a tidal wave bomb, and it was tested by the Army as early as 1944 and 1945. And they stated if the project had been completed before the end of the war, it could have played a role as effective as that of the atom bomb. The details of the tsunami bomb, known as Project SEAL, contained in 53-year-old documents released by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The U.S. and British military were eager for a SEAL to be developed in post-war years too. So the high-ranking New Zealand and U.S. officers spoke out in support of the research. And what they did was they laid a pattern of explosives underwater to create a tsunami. Small-scale explosions were carried out in the Pacific, again, back in World War II era, but it was never tested on full scale. Really? Are we sure about that? Can anyone remember the Fukushima disaster in Japan? I'm not saying that that was it, but they do have the power to do it. Politicians, media, and useful idiots such as Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion are using these potentially man-made climate events to incite fear, alter perception, and instill restrictions, often with catastrophic consequences on the global population. We see what this is doing. These events may be man-made. This agenda we know is being shoved down everybody's throats at a record pace. They have goals to meet. 2025 and 2030 aren't far away. This is what's happening in the UK right now, these ULEZ zones, which are restricting certain vehicles from entering areas of businesses, and these businesses are suffering because of it. These 15-minute cities, these banning of gasoline-powered vehicles, we're seeing this climate change agenda being brought forth harder and stricter every single day. And so now we don't know if they're manipulating the weather to make it more real, to make it more believable. But I'm just letting you know what's out there and what's been out there since the 40s, and who knows, maybe even earlier. But what can you do about it? Well, in my Substack, I go over understanding the vulnerabilities in your area, know about where you live, and what are the natural disaster type events that could happen in your area, whether it be hurricanes, flooding, tornadoes, earthquakes, what affects you or could affect you in a natural disaster kind of way, especially wildfires. Do you live near wooded areas? Do you live near water? And take that into account in your preparedness planning. I suggest fortifying your home now. Do it while you have time, while there's no panicking. I feel terrible about the residents in Maui. They had no warning. Their homes were taken to a devastating degree. Those fire sirens didn't go off. And who knows if they were prepared, what could have happened, or maybe they could have handled the situation or got through the situation a little bit better. We'll never know that. But the thing is, we could be prepared now. And how do you best prepare your home for something like fire or water? In my Substack, I included these following recommendations for fire barriers, to include defensible space, fire-resistant plants, rock and gravel zones, irrigation, mulch management, water barriers such as rain gardens, swales, berms, retention ponds, permeable surfaces, native vegetation, and terracing. And then I want you to be aware of land development goals for your area. Are you hearing about 15-minute cities coming to you? Or AI cities or smart city churning where you live into a smart city? I would take that as a warning for what's to come in the very near future. It's basically alerting you that your freedoms are about to be restricted. Once you start hearing about your city becoming a 15-minute city, know that means a lot of restrictions are coming to your city, and you may be only able to leave on certain days and times. Don't get caught off guard. That's why I write these Substacks and create these videos for you, so that you know what's going on and that you know what's to come, and that you can prepare yourself and your family for it and against it. Until next time, my fellow warriors, stay informed, stay vigilant, ever forward.